Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Welcome everybody, and welcome to those of you who are joining us online. My name is Sid Smith, and I'm the host for today's session with Brad. Many of you know Brad. He's done so much for the church. He organizes so many interesting speakers for us and field trips to various places around this part of Michigan. He is emeritus at the University of Michigan's Department of Art History, in which he has long served as the Associate Director of the Museum Studies program. And he teaches both the graduate and undergraduate programs and coordinates student internships. Brad holds 2 master's degrees in an early iteration at the University of Michigan of a museum studies program and of a master's in information and library science, and he's got his doctorate from the School of Information. His research passions focus on the nature of the museum experience and the evolving role of the museum in society. Museums surround us, from the monumental and grandiose to the small community museum, history museums. I'm thinking right now of that amazing event that's taken place in Egypt in the last week, the opening of the Cairo Archaeological and Anthropological Museum, the great museum that has been 20 years being built. And about its location right in front of the pyramids at Giza. And in the center of it, in the central area that people enter, is this mammoth sculpture of Ramses II, 83 tons, 32 feet tall. But on Brad's website on the university, he's left this wonderful, wonderful reflection about things small in museums and how they can grasp us and excite us. He writes that in his years of traveling to museums around the world, he has found no object more intriguing than Thomas Edison's last breath, caught in a bottle, displayed at the Henry Ford Museum. So from the monumental to the ineffable, he can talk to us about museums, and today, museums and forgiveness. Brad.
Yes. Thank you, Sid, for that introduction. And thank you, my friends and people I respect, for turning out today. It's a pleasure to have yet another opportunity to talk to you about my interest in museums. I'm grateful to Sid for giving you a little bit of my background. I've been part of this church for about a dozen years, and I think most of you know me as a trip planner and more recently as Santa Claus. So I did have a life prior to all of that. In fact, my interest in museums goes back to my boyhood when I created a museum in my parents' house. I colored pictures in a coloring book, cut them out of the book, taped them onto the basement wall, rounded up my friends and charged them each a nickel to come down the basement and see the museum. In that same spirit, a year and a half ago, I opened my second museum, which I have named the Nickel Museum in honor of the first one. And it's situated inside of our 2-car garage at our condominium complex. I have 64 works of art, 2 crystal chandeliers, because all museums have to have chandeliers, and 2 cars, because my wife insisted that we be able to get the cars into the museum. We had a grand opening, and we had over 100 people, many of them seniors from this church, at the opening. We had a champagne reception, we had live harp music, and Melissa Ann came out and gave a benediction at the opening of the garage gallery. I'm planning a second reception sometime this summer. So for those of you that missed the grand opening, a year and a half ago. We'll be back at it celebrating again. Each year, admission to the new garage gallery goes toward an annual donation made to the Michigan Museums Association. So that's my beginning and end with museum. Personal museums. In between, there's 50 years of researching, working in, teaching about, interning in, et cetera, taking seniors to museums. And for those of you that think that you've seen them all, in Ann Arbor alone, there are 18 different museums. And my guess is you can name about 2, maybe 3. And in the country as a whole, there are close to 35,000 museums. There are more people that go on museum visits annually than go to professional sports events. That knocked me out when I saw that, and I'm still not sure that I believe it. But that's what the American Association of Museums says. Museums come in all sizes and in multiple types. I'm sure if I ask you to name museum types, what's a type of museum? It's an art museum, history museum, natural history, transportation, automobile, musical instruments.
Barbed wire.
There is one. There is one. Have you been? No. Okay. I can top that though. I've been to the International Museum of Ice in Port Huron, and there's a nun doll museum, N-U-N doll museum up near the Mackinac Bridge, where you can see 600 different nun dolls on display there. So there's a variety of types, but I will add to art museum, history museum, natural science museum, which are sort of the big 3. There are children's museums out there. We count zoos and aquariums as types of museums. Botanical gardens and arboreta as types of museums. These are museums of living things as opposed to museums of inanimate objects. By far, one type of museum outweighs all the others in terms of numbers in this country by more than half. So more than half, probably 2/3 of the museums in this country are
Art.
no,
History.
no,
Cars.
no.
Barbed wire.
Yes. Graham's cheating, he said mathematics. That's not true. Historical societies. Every town has one. We drive by them all the time and rarely think about going in and seeing them. They're usually run by a passionate group of local individuals who care deeply about what they're doing. And the statistic that I can give you about historical societies is they usually have 1 employee or fewer. Rarely do you see anybody with museum training working in one of those little history museums, but they're fueled by passion and an interest in local history, and that's what keeps those institutions going. So your sense of the breadth of museums should be changed, hopefully, at this point. I want to talk, and purposes for going to museums. You would say, why do people go to museums? They go because they want to be educated, that there's some educational component.
They want to know about their past.
They want to know about their past.
Just enjoy it.
Enjoy it. You're close, Bill. Curiosity. What do people say that they want in an art museum? Beautiful things, spiritual uplift, this notion of being uplifted somehow by being in these environments. No, the American Association of Museums has done their work on this one too. And by far the number one reason that people visit museums is to socialize with family and friends. By far the number one reason. And so in that sense, museums are in competition, quote unquote, with other sorts of organizations that provide opportunities to socialize with families and friends. Parks, pools, bowling alleys, amusement parks, other places that people can, yes. And so that again changes our notion of what museums are like. So we each have our own reasons for wanting to go and enjoying to be in museums. In some cases, it's curiosity. We want to learn something. We want to understand our history. We want to see pretty things. We want to be bowled over by things. All of those are sort of common reasons that we say that we want to go to museums. And I want to offer another way of thinking about or enjoying museums when you're there. And that has to do with this notion of forgiveness. This is Rembrandt's painting of the prodigal son. Linda, I saw you earlier. Linda Speck is here somewhere. Yeah, Linda was fortunate enough to see this in person. And this is located where, Linda?
It's in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg,
Uh-huh.
Russia. And the fire went to Russia some years ago.
So this is in St. Petersburg. It's nothing we're likely to see easily in our lifetimes. But this does it presents this notion of forgiveness and, in a sense, homecoming and being welcomed back to family very easily. And I want you to think at the end of this lecture that there's yet another way that you can think about the museum experience when you're there. And that is a sense of acceptance of the problematic nature of what museums as institutions are. It gives you a different way to look at them. So let me explain through this presentation. Museums can be indoors, museums can be outdoors. This is a building that's part of the complex called Greenfield Village, about a half hour from here. It's created by Henry Ford, the auto manufacturer, in the 20s and 30s largely, though they continue to add to it today. This particular building comes from a rural site in England. Ford liked the building. Thought that he wanted to add it to his collection of over 100 buildings in Greenfield Village, purchased it, brought in workers to work on the dismantling of the building, shipped it over to the U.S. without anybody locally knowing that it was Henry Ford who had purchased it or where its destination was. And almost immediately after, the British government placed laws preventing others from taking their cultural heritage out of the country. As Sid promised, this is Thomas Edison's last breath in a bottle. On display at the Henry Ford. It's sort of like Where's Waldo? They move it often enough that you have to hunt it out, but it's always on display there somewhere. The piece of this that fascinates me, of course, is the person who was standing over Thomas Edison with this test tube, waiting for that last breath to come. And I think that must have freaked Edison out and probably led to an early death. Museums can take up whole neighborhoods, parts of cities. This is the Heidelberg Project in Detroit, or what was the Heidelberg Project in Detroit. There's less of it now. About 10 years ago, they went through a series of 13 arson fires in the course of a year that destroyed much of it. But this was a art installation in the poorest zip code in the United States that was worked on by one artist for over 35 years. And he brought reclaimed materials from around the city of Detroit and used them to decorate abandoned buildings in the neighborhood in which he was born. He interacted with local schools and provided art instruction where there was no art instruction. And it was a wonderful meeting place for people of all backgrounds inside this really unfortunate neighborhood. There were people from around the larger Detroit area that would come there and feel perfectly safe spending time in the Heidelberg Project. And in fact, when I had talks with the director of the Detroit Institute of Arts, and they get many more visitors a year than the Heidelberg Project, he said, I would give my eye teeth to have the audience that they have at the DIA, which was the previous director famously said, the DIA has done a wonderful job for 100 years serving 2% of the population. And the Heidelberg Project has a diversity of population that the DIA, up till that point, had failed to realize. Museums are also, can also be sites of remembrance associated with particular tragedies. This is a site in rural France near Limoges called Oradour-sur-Glane, which was a rural village in which the Nazis came in near the end of the war in 1944 on their retreat from the south to the north and executed everybody in the town in a single day. Burned all the buildings in town. The women and children were gathered together in this church, and the church was set on fire, and they all burned to death inside the church. And there were over 900 people that died that day. And rather than building a memorial, they have maintained the village the way that it was in 1944. And people can travel to Oradour-sur-Glane and walk around this site of martyrdom. So that's another function that museums can play. Now let's get into the big stuff here. How museums gather their collections together. Museums as we know them haven't existed for all that long. Collecting has been an activity that people engage in for many, many, many years. But the early collections of importance were the collections pulled together by the Catholic Church, important antiquities and things of wealth, and also the wealthy, the really, really wealthy in Western Europe, who would dedicate rooms in their large homes to what were called cabinets of curiosity. And these were interesting things from around the world that they would have their wealthy friends come and visit. The notion of the modern museum as we know it today started taking shape in Western Europe in the 18th century and largely in the 19th century. So they're not that old. And the early collections in the West were collections pulled together by the state. So there were national museums. And where did these collections come from? They came from lots of places, but did they go out to galleries and buy things for their museums? No. From war. Going back and forth and stealing each other's cultural heritage. And by colonizing different parts of the world and taking treasures that belonged to other societies and bringing them back. And it was a way to build the power and esteem of the country by putting on display this wealth of treasure that you had. The educational notion of museums, and museums being for the public, and for being a place to uplift and to educate, is pretty much a mid-19th century concept. and it's associated with the rise of the middle class. And the ruling class, the wealthy class, didn't really know how the middle class was going to behave. And so you saw the appearance of symphony orchestras and choirs and museums and public libraries as a means of civilizing this rising middle class. So museums as we know them today, not all that old. And this is an example from the British Museum of what are called the Parthenon marbles, or Elgin marbles, depending on whose side of the story that you're on. But these were pieces, architectural pieces that lined the exterior of the Parthenon in Athens. And there was a wealthy Brit in the 18th century who asked for permission from the ruling Ottoman Empire to go and make drawings of these friezes. Instead, he thought it would be easier if he removed the friezes and brought them back to the UK, where they've been ever since. And the UK said to Greece, the modern state of Greece, for many years, we're protecting these. You're not able to care for these as they should be cared for. So, they renovated the Parthenon, they got everything squared away, and they said, okay, now we'll take them. And he said, no, now this is part of our heritage. This is part of our national story. And besides, the museum doesn't own the pieces. The Queen owns the pieces. And so you'd need to get her permission. So you can go back and do the reading, but over the course of the past 50, 60 years or so, back and forth, like a tennis match between the British Museum and the state of Greece over the fate of the Parthenon marbles, known in England as the Elgin marbles. And this is just one instance of museum collections that have sort of traveled under a cloud to where they exist today. Display, museums display. This is an example from 1904. For those of you that have seen the movie Meet Me in St. Louis, you know that it's centered around the St. Louis World's Fair from 1904. This was an exhibit at the World's Fair in 1904. What were they exhibiting? Human beings. They went to what we call now the Philippines, and they went to a number of the islands, and they persuaded natives to sign on and come live/work in a village that was going to be created at the World's Fair, and that they would be paid to appear at the village. And there were close to 1,600 people that signed up from a variety of the different islands, with different languages, with different belief systems, with different cultural backgrounds. And they were presented, of course, as a monolith to those that came to see the people in the Igorot village at the 1904 World's Fair. Climate conditions aren't the same in the Philippines as they are in St. Louis, especially during the winter. And the fair organizers decided that when the people came to visit the Igorot village, they wanted the natives wearing their version of native wear. Many of them died from the exposure to the elements. They were forced to, at scheduled times, fight each other to the death, to eat dog. And this was foreign to many of these individuals. They didn't know why they were being asked to do this. But the paying public had their notion of what it was that savages or tribal members were. And they were interested essentially in having the superiority of their culture portrayed. Really a dark chapter in this. There's a video out called Bontoc Eulogy that's available on YouTube, all about this incident in history. When they died, their brains were removed and kept in jars for study purposes. Not a one of these individuals ever made it home to the Philippines. And this is our superior Western culture that was running this. Forgiveness gives you cause to reflect.
How many were there?
I'm going to say 1,600, and I'm sure that's within 500 or so.
They all died?
Yes, yes. None of them were returned
Oh, okay.
to the Philippines. We have other problems with human beings in museums. There are medical museums that have bodies, anatomical specimens on display. But what I want to talk about here is something more pertinent to our time, having to do with the collection of Native American materials for inclusion in American anthropology museums, often in academic institutions, where teams of academic anthropologists in the late 19th century, early 20th century would venture out into our country and, as part of their research process, excavate buried Native Americans and bring them back to American museums for study purposes. Imagine having your grandma or grandpa dug up and transported someplace else for study purposes. This was commonly done around this country. The US government stepped in the 1990s and passed, the acronym is NAGPRA, N-A-G-P-R-A, Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act. The repatriation word means sending back, returning. And it required museums around the country that had human remains from Native American populations to inventory what they had and to publish lists of what they had, who they had, and where they were taken from. And tribes that exist today were allowed to apply to have those human remains returned. Nice in concept, very difficult to administer. This university, our university, my university, University of Michigan, has a collection of human remains that they've been working conscientiously to return, but it's complicated by any number of factors. And we have over 1,400 individuals still in essentially shoeboxes over on Kipke Drive near the stadium. And you multiply this across large research universities across the country and smaller museums. Something to be mindful of, something to give you, to ask you to think about our role today as inheritors of this legacy when we think about museums. There are ethnic museums. Ethnic museums, this is the dome from the Arab American National Museum in Dearborn. which has got a fantastic story behind it that I don't have time to go into. But it's an example of the type of sort of hyphenate museum. The Arab American National Museum, the Chinese American National Museum, the Japanese American National Museum, the African American History Museum in Detroit. Why all of these separate museums? Why all? Why do they all have to have their own museums? Is what you hear. Because the story of these people were never told in other museums. It's as though these populations who are part of our country don't exist or didn't exist. And you go into I'm not picking on the DIA, but just it's a local example. They have a tiny gallery associated with Native American art and a slightly larger gallery dedicated to African American art. And it sort of, it has been left to these other populations to tell their own stories because they weren't being told anyplace else. And when we go into a classic Western museum, it's as though these other people don't exist. They're not there for us to see or us to experience or to have our minds broadened by that. So this is a special type of museum that's been around for about 50 years. And they're dotting them all in Washington, D.C., finally. And some of you have been to this museum with me. This is on the west side of the state. This is the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia. Of racist memorabilia. Those of you that watch Henry Louis Gates's show on genealogy on PBS, he has been to this museum. He said that this is the most important museum in the United States. So if you haven't been there, go there. It's in Big Rapids, which is north of Grand Rapids. And it's part of the university there. It was started by one man who, when he was a boy, a black man, bought racist salt and pepper shakers, paid for them, and smashed them on the ground. He's changed his mind since then. And he says there's a story to tell with this stuff. And so he's gathered much of this in his museum in Big Rapids.
What's it called?
The Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia. We've had two First Pres visits there. One time, back in the Fairfax days, all of the clergy went there. And the resident ministers, everybody that worked for the church went there for one day. And we've had the seniors there as well. The museum has grown and grown and grown and grown. And what does that say? That speaks to the amount of material there is available to display. And David Pilgrim, who is the director there, says, I have enough hateful material on women, gays, Hispanics, etc., he said, to fill many more museums. And he said, the production of this material hasn't stopped. He says the center of production has changed, but anybody can buy anything that they want on the internet without being seen, and they do. It's really uncomfortable to be a white person in this environment. It's a really special experience. So another example of reasons to think about museums in a different way when we're there. I'm not against going and enjoying yourself and have a good time, because I do that too. But know at the back of your mind that there are all sorts of questions and conflicts that underline how the museums that we enjoy today came to be. And if this moves you to think differently, to ask for a bit of collective forgiveness where we've been as a society, then I think that's an okay thing to do. Feeling uncomfortable isn't that bad a thing. And I've got one last slide here. Yes, the slides are available. They won't be on eBay. You'll have to, or Amazon. You'll have to get them this way. Thank you for your attention this morning. I've got all sorts of time for questions, for comments. I've got several other hours of things that I could tell you about.
Thanks, Brad. I'll just note it's 11:30, so if you have to leave for a reason, feel free to move out. Brad's available to continue with the conversation, and we'll take questions. And just when you ask a question or you're recognized, I need to get you the microphone so that it will be audible to the people online.
This is a shameless plug. I'm associated with two museums here in town. One is the Museum on Main Street, which has just opened a new exhibit on the Huron River watershed, and also Cobblestone Farm, which is open today with one of their 4 main programs, and it's this afternoon until 4 o'clock, so you're all invited.
Thank you, Pam. Graham is here in the front row.
Oh,
Sid.
sorry, Greg.
Thank you. I was interested about the Elgin marbles, because I think there's still discussion currently about returning these to Greece.
There is indeed,
And
as
another
there,
issue-
as there has been for 50 years.
Yeah. But I know that the museum in Denver is having to return some artifacts to Cambodia, I believe.
Yep. There's a fair amount of that, and I didn't get into that. Some museums are being very forward-thinking about this and are voluntarily returning things that have problematic provenance associated with them. And some are being settled by lawsuits.
Yes.
Hello, this is Savas. I'm from Greece, and the Elgin marbles are, a big subject in the country. But it's such a complex issue, and let me give you just a little example of that. They say that, the government gave us permission to take the marbles away. At the time, the government in Greece was the Ottoman Empire. So from their viewpoint, we got the government permission to take the marbles. The Greek government, of course, says, this was not the real government. It was just a regime who have been taken over. So that's what I'm saying is the discussion has no end. And but the other, so another thing the British are saying is they took one of the statues of the ladies who support the temple, the Caryatids. Yeah, so that statue, they say, is the best preserved statue you have, because we took it, and the other statues, they stayed in Athens with the automobile fumes and everything else, and and it's true that that the statue at the British Museum in London is the best preserved statue of the Caryatids. So it's a very long discussion, and at the museum in New York at the Met, half the statues are from Egypt. So it's a very long discussion. I'm going to pass the mic back to Brad. Thank you.
Why Elgin? Was it Lord Elgin or something?
Lord Elgin.
In line with what this gentleman just said, when Gary and I were in Philadelphia, we went to the art museum, and we went to a presentation about the pros and cons of returning artifacts back to, and in line with that, the woman was a very good presenter, but she said one of the problems is that there is value in having items in various places, because in times of political instability, oftentimes the first thing that is destroyed are the cultural artifacts. Now, we've seen that with the Islamic State blew up some of the greatest antiquities that they had in that part of the world, and so they're gone forever. So it's a very difficult subject with pros and cons, but it did give us a lot to think about in terms of making sure that that in one malign government or military, whatever, can destroy so much so fast, and then there's no record. It's gone forever.
And now that I've dug myself a bit of a hole with museums, let me just reaffirm that I really think they're terrific. And I enjoy them. The fact that they're problematic doesn't make me love them any less. Michelle.
This is a somewhat different summation. My husband, when he was alive, was a collector. And he collected an awful lot about the Holocaust. And he collected stuff that they didn't have in their library in Orchard Lake Road at the time. When he died, I took about 176 books of his to them. They were very happy to have it because some of it they'd never seen before. So they were delighted to have that. And it was a beautiful museum, beautifully done. And it's moved now. I haven't been to the new one, but it's moved, and it tells a large story. He also was very interested in Native American stuff. Had a lot of books on that too. So I looked around and I discovered that there was indeed a Native American museum in a rather poor area, not a very nice area, but he had a lot of books. So I duly went down there. Very different to see. Very different. And in a poor area, almost no books at all. I think we had about 70 books.
Huh.
They were delighted to have that because it sort of started their library. That they didn't have much of anything there. It was a very stark way of looking at where there had been money spent and where there was no money. And in fact, I believe that museum is now closed altogether.
Well, funding for museums has always been problematic,
Yeah.
and it's about to become much more problematic. Yeah. Well, your notion about how museums support themselves, the rule of thumb has been they get a third of their income through ticket sales. They rely on a third of their money from gifts from the outside, from philanthropy, as it were, and running a friends program. And the other third has come from grants. And we know what's happened to state and federal grants. They're really going to be in tight times. And you see some museums getting aggressive into holding events, holding weddings, holding weekend events, a car festival, this, that, or the other. This is what they're doing in order to shore up their bottom line.
I wanted to, I'll get you in a minute. I wanted to also note about the, you were talking about the hyphenated museums, the cultural the museums developed around certain ethnic identities. That there also has been a terrible problem with women artists getting into museums. And or being recognized as artists at all. And there, I guess one of the earliest ones in the States was in Washington, the Museum of Women's, I forgot.
They have 2 or 3 in DC.
Yeah. So it's like, it's how do people break into and become recognized for whatever they are producing.
Right, not in their own museum,
Right.
but being
Right.
accepted into the
Right.
larger museums.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is, I mean, the museumization of culture after about 1850, early 19th century, meant that ratcheted up, I think, the black market in objects, although that's, also the wealthy wanted
Yeah,
black market, especially from places like Cambodia, but all over. And there's this whole other, there's a whole underground exploitation that gets wrapped up in the development of museum objects.
absolutely. David Pilgrim mentioned that the market for racist materials
Right.
is as strong now as it's ever been. That because it's out of our sight doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It means that it travels other ways.
Is it made foreign? Is it a foreign made?
David,
Yeah, is that a foreign-made product?
David said that the center of production has moved largely to Central and South America, but the market is the U.S. Let me mention as well two different types of museums. We assume that museums are nonprofit institutions, and we have a vague notion of what a nonprofit institution is, that it's supposed to better the public somehow, and educate the public and uplift the public. Well, there's another stream in American museums, and that's the for-profit, for entertainment museum that was early on associated with P.T. Barnum in the 19th century. And we see today in Ripley's Believe It or Not museums and other museums of that sort, not as prevalent as they were at one point. But if you see that there are for-profit museums out there, they're part of our history. And museums that don't do a especially good job of educating or care much about that, but just want to entertain, that's part of our heritage too. Just a different type of museum. Endlessly fascinating, folks. Yes, Sid.
Could you, let me ask my question before. What about online museums now? Online curation and the sense of the digital museum?
Yep. Those. Thank you for reminding me of those. There are both online museums that are digital representations of things that exist in three-dimensional form someplace else, but there are also museums for artwork and other things that were born digital and exist only in digital form, and those being presented as types of museums. It's a little harder to wrap our heads around those things when they're not anything that we can see or touch. They seem unreal somehow to us. But the gathering of materials that are, there's a former student of mine that is dealing with a collection of photographs of Philippine natives taken in the early 20th century that number in the thousands, that were dispersed over 7 or 8 universities and exist in different places. Ricky's working on digital reunification of those collections. So representations of those photographs can be made available in one place when they're dispersed over multiple places right now. So that's another way that digital tools can be used to create new museum spaces, as it were, that don't exist otherwise. Oh, my
This
word.
is a little museum of its own.
A living
Yes.
collection.
And this is a small sign of our appreciation.
Oh,
for
thank you so
talking to
much.
us.
And seniors, there are plenty of places we have yet to go that we haven't been.
Yeah.
I haven't told you about the American Farm Toy Museum that's located in Blissfield, down near the state line, a collection of 12,000 farm toys. Stick with me.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Great turnout.